Jamie Dimon doesn't play by the rules, he rewrites them. From the moment he stepped into the world of finance, he wasn't there to make a living. He was there to take over. Some people spend their whole lives trying to climb the corporate ladder. Dimon? He was too busy building his own. Born into a family of bankers, he had every advantage: private schools, connections, a clear path to success. But privilege alone wasn't enough for him. He didn't just want to be rich. He wanted to be the smartest, the sharpest, the most powerful person in any room he walked into. His grandfather came to New York with nothing and built a name for himself in finance. His father, Theodore Dimon, followed the same path, becoming a successful stockbroker. Jamie had money, security, a future handed to him on a silver platter. But that was never going to be his story. From a young age, he was different. Ruthlessly competitive, obsessed with winning, and completely unwilling to accept second place. While other kids were playing games, Jamie was studying the markets, analyzing stocks, and figuring out how money worked. He wasn't interested in the idea of wealth, he was interested in control. But life had a way of testing him early. He had his sights set on Brown University, rejected. He tried transferring to Princeton, rejected again. These weren't just letters on a piece of paper, they were personal attacks. Jamie Dimon believed he was destined for greatness, and yet, the so-called best schools in the country didn't see it. That wasn't just a setback, it was fuel. He ended up at Tufts University, a school that, in his mind, was beneath him. But if there was one thing Jamie Dimon knew how to do, it was turn losses into wins. If the Ivy League wouldn't take him, he'd make sure they regretted it. He buried himself in his studies, dissected every subject, and made sure there wasn't a single person on campus who could outwork him. By the time he graduated, he was at the top of his class, summa cum laude. The same schools that rejected him now looked foolish. And then, the moment he had been waiting for, Harvard Business School. This time, there was no rejection letter. But even at Harvard, Jamie Dimon wasn't like the others. Most students followed the unwritten rules: dress sharp, blend in, network quietly. Dimon? He didn't blend in. He walked around in jeans and leather jackets, refused to live on campus, and spoke his mind loudly. He didn't care about fitting in, he cared about being the best. While his classmates were eyeing cushy investment banking jobs, Dimon had other plans. He didn't just want a job, he wanted a kingdom. When he graduated as a Baker Scholar, an honor reserved for the top 5% of his class, Wall Street practically threw itself at him. Offers poured in from Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch. He turned them all down. Because Jamie Dimon wasn't chasing a paycheck. He was chasing power. Instead, he took a third of the salary to work for a man named Sandy Weil. Most people saw Weil as just another businessman. Dimon saw a warlord. A man who had built and rebuilt financial empires from the ground up. A dealmaker who played the long game. And Jamie wanted in. Dimon didn't just take a job, he embedded himself into Weil's world. He studied every move, every deal, every conversation. While other MBAs were stuck crunching numbers in cubicles, Dimon was sitting at the table, learning how the game was really played. At just 26 years old, he was already involved in negotiations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But he wasn't satisfied with just being a student. He was plotting his own rise. And Weil saw something in him, a younger version of himself. Someone who didn't just follow orders but could see 10 moves ahead. Weil brought Dimon deeper into his circle, giving him control over major financial decisions. While other young bankers spent years working their way up, Dimon was already shaping the future of billion-dollar companies. He learned not just how to grow a business, but how to take over an industry. Most people in finance have a breaking point. A moment where the pressure cracks them. Dimon didn't break, he thrived. He worked harder, pushed further, and became the most trusted person in Wile's empire. But with power came rivalries. People twice his age resented him, feared him, even tried to undermine him. Dimon didn't care. He knew the truth: the strong survive, and the weak get left behind. By his late 20s, he wasn't just making deals, he was calling the shots. Weil handed him the keys to his growing empire, and together, they built one of the most powerful financial conglomerates in history. But Jamie Dimon wasn't just learning how to build. He was preparing for something bigger. A moment that would define him. Because he knew that in the world of finance, power isn't given. It's taken. And Jamie Dimon was ready to take it all. But ambition comes at a cost. Every move he made, every deal he closed, every power play he executed, he was making enemies. People twice his age resented his rapid rise. Boardrooms whispered about him. Rivals waited for him to slip up. Dimon, however, was always 3 steps ahead. He wasn't just a student of finance, he was a master strategist. Sandy Weil saw it. He knew Dimon wasn't just another executive, he was the future. And for a while, their partnership was unshakable. Dimon learned the ropes, sharpened his instincts, and proved himself invaluable. Weil needed him. But what Weil didn't realize was that Jamie Dimon was never meant to be a second-in-command. He wasn't just there to assist, he was there to lead. And deep down, Weil must have known. Because as Dimon's power grew, their relationship began to crack. Weil had built his empire with his own hands, and now, the man he had mentored was beginning to cast a shadow over him. Their partnership was heading toward a crossroads, and Dimon, as always, was prepared. The moment of reckoning wasn't far. And when it came, it would shake Wall Street to its core. But one thing was certain: Jamie Dimon wasn't going to back down. He had fought too hard, climbed too high. The throne was within reach. And nothing, not even the man who had given him his start, was going to stop him from taking it. Jamie Dimon had spent years proving himself. He wasn't just an employee, he was the architect behind some of the biggest deals in finance. And for a while, his partnership with Sandy Weil was unstoppable. They built an empire together, turning struggling companies into financial powerhouses. But there was one problem. Dimon didn't want to be second in command forever. Sandy Weil had always been the king, the mastermind behind mergers and acquisitions that reshaped Wall Street. But Jamie wasn't just a protege, he was a challenger. And Weil knew it. He had brought Dimon in as a trusted lieutenant, but now, Dimon's power was growing. He was making major decisions, earning respect from the industry, and, perhaps most dangerously, becoming irreplaceable. For a while, the balance held. Weil relied on Dimon's brilliance to close deals and expand their financial empire. But as the years passed, Dimon started demanding more control. He wasn't just doing the work, he wanted credit. He wanted a seat at the top. He had spent over a decade helping Weil construct a financial empire from the ground up, and in his mind, there was no question about who should be next in line. Then came the turning point. They had transformed commercial credit into Primerica, then merged it with Travelers Group, then Citibank. Every step was bigger, more ambitious. By the late 90s, Citigroup was born, the largest financial services company in the world. And Jamie Dimon? He was the president of Citigroup, second only to Weil. That should have been the moment of victory. But instead, it became the beginning of his downfall. Sandy Weil had built his career on controlling everything. He was the type of leader who made the final call on every deal, every hire, every decision. And now, his right-hand man was becoming a threat. Jamie Dimon wasn't just following orders anymore, he was challenging Weil. Questioning his strategies. Disagreeing with him in meetings. Making it clear that he wanted the top job. And people started noticing. Executives within Citigroup saw the shift in dynamics. Some remained loyal to Weil, but others began to gravitate toward Dimon. They saw in him a leader who was younger, sharper, and more aggressive. A leader who could push Citigroup even further. Tensions escalated. What had once been a mentor-protégé relationship turned into a Cold War. Dimon saw himself as Weil's natural successor, but Weil wasn't ready to step aside. He had spent his whole life climbing to the top, why would he hand over the throne now? For Weil, there was no way to share power. He had seen what happened to CEOs who loosened their grip. They were replaced, forgotten, cast aside. And he wasn't about to let that happen to him. Then came the final straw. Weil had always treated Citigroup like a family business, bringing in people he trusted. That included his daughter, Jessica Biblievich, who was put in charge of the company's mutual fund division. She had influence, but Dimon didn't believe in nepotism. He was a man who valued results. If someone wasn't delivering, they didn't deserve to be promoted, no exceptions. And when Jessica's division underperformed, he refused to promote her. It was a direct challenge to Weil's authority. And it didn't go unnoticed. Executives whispered about it in meetings. Some agreed with Dimon. Others wondered if he had gone too far. But one thing was clear, the relationship between Jamie Dimon and Sandy Weil had shattered. At that moment, Weil made a decision. Dimon wasn't his protégé anymore, he was an enemy. For months, Dimon felt the shift. Weil no longer confided in him like he used to. Meetings became colder. Decisions were made without his input. He could see the writing on the wall. But Dimon wasn't the type to back down. If Weil was going to push him out, he wasn't going to leave quietly. On a quiet November morning, Jamie Dimon walked into the office, thinking it was just another day at Citigroup. He had been preparing for an internal battle, gathering allies, positioning himself for a potential coup if Weil made his move. But he never got the chance. Weil called him into a meeting. There were no negotiations, no second chances. Just 5 words that changed everything. Jamie, it's time for you to go. After 15 years of building one of the most powerful financial empires in the world, Dimon was fired. Just like that. No farewell speeches. No golden parachute. Just exile. Weil had planned every step. The board was already on his side. There was no vote, no discussion. Just a swift execution. Jamie Dimon, the man who had helped build Citigroup from the ground up, was out. He was stunned. He had sacrificed everything for this company. Worked longer, harder, and smarter than anyone else. And now, he was out. When he left the building that day, it wasn't just a job he lost. It was a kingdom. Everything he had built, everything he had worked for, gone in an instant. He went home to his wife and kids, trying to process what had happened. His youngest daughter, just a child at the time, asked him a simple question, "Dad, are we going to be okay?" That was all it took. A moment of clarity. Jamie Dimon wasn't the type to sit around and feel sorry for himself. He wasn't going to fade into obscurity. If Weil thought this was the end, he had made a mistake. He made a promise to himself. He was going to come back. Bigger. Stronger. More powerful than ever. And this time, no one was going to stop him. He spent months waiting. Watching. Studying the industry. He could have joined another bank right away, offers were already coming in. But Dimon wasn't looking for just any opportunity. He wanted a way back to the top. He wanted a kingdom of his own. That's when he found Bank One. A struggling financial institution, failing from mismanagement, on the brink of collapse. Other executives wouldn't touch it. But Jamie Dimon? He saw something different. He saw a second chance. While others viewed Bank One as a sinking ship, Dimon saw a vessel he could rebuild from the ground up. And this time, there would be no Sandy Weil. No mentor to share power with. No one above him. Bank One was his opportunity to prove that Citigroup needed him more than he needed Citigroup. And that's exactly what he was about to do. Jamie Dimon had just suffered the most humiliating defeat of his career. He had spent 15 years building one of the most powerful financial empires in the world, only to be cast aside like an unimportant footnote in Sandy Weil's story. Wall Street watched in shock. Some assumed he would disappear into obscurity, living off his wealth, maybe taking an advisory role somewhere. But those people didn't understand Dimon. Failure wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of his comeback. For months, he laid low. He could have jumped back into the game immediately, there were offers, plenty of them. Big banks wanted him. Hedge funds wanted him. Private equity firms threw money at him. But Dimon wasn't looking for a job. He wasn't interested in playing second fiddle to another CEO, sitting on some advisory board, or cashing easy paychecks. He wanted revenge. But Dimon wasn't reckless. He wasn't about to launch a hasty coup at another company or rush into a bad deal just to get back into the game. If he was going to return, he needed the right company. One that was weak enough for him to take over, but strong enough for him to rebuild into a powerhouse. Then he found Bank One. To most people, it looked like a disaster. A failing financial institution, riddled with problems. Its CEO, John McCoy, was known for extravagant spending while the company's earnings plummeted. Morale was low, its stock price had collapsed, and it was bleeding money. Most executives would have stayed far away. But Jamie Dimon wasn't most executives. He saw opportunity. Bank One wasn't beyond saving, it was simply mismanaged. It wasn't dying because of bad fundamentals, it was dying because of bad leadership. And fixing that? That was Jamie Dimon's specialty. So when Bank One came knocking, looking for a wartime CEO to take over the wreckage, Dimon took the job. Not for the salary, not for the prestige, but for the power. His first move was simple. Clean house. On his first day, he walked into the boardroom, looked around, and immediately fired 12,000 employees. Not because he enjoyed it. Not because he was ruthless for the sake of it. But because Bank One was drowning in inefficiency, weighed down by overpaid executives and unnecessary departments. He slashed executive perks. No more private jets. No more luxury golf retreats. No more ridiculous bonuses for failure. He cut costs aggressively, shutting down bad business lines, refocusing the company on profitability over waste. People called him cold, heartless, a corporate executioner. But Wall Street? They loved it. For years, Bank One had been an underperforming mess, seen as a joke in the banking world. But under Dimon, the stock price surged. Investors suddenly saw potential. Analysts who once dismissed the company began reconsidering. But it wasn't enough for Dimon to just fix Bank One. He needed to turn it into a powerhouse. His strategy was aggressive. First, he built what he called a fortress balance sheet, cutting debt, increasing cash reserves, ensuring the company could withstand any financial storm. Unlike the reckless bankers who chased short-term profits, Dimon was playing the long game. Within 3 years, Bank One was no longer a failing institution. It was a thriving one. It posted record profits, its stock had recovered, and most importantly, Jamie Dimon had proven he could win without Sandy Weil. But he wasn't done. Bank One was just the stepping stone. Now, he wanted JPMorgan. To Wall Street, JPMorgan Chase was a sleeping giant. A once mighty financial institution that had fallen behind its competitors. It had survived the dot-com bubble, but it was losing ground to more aggressive firms like Citigroup. Its CEO, William Harrison, was nearing retirement, and the company was in desperate need of strong leadership. Dimon saw his opening. The idea of merging Bank One and JPMorgan Chase was floated. On paper, it made sense. Bank One had strong retail banking, while JPMorgan had a powerful investment arm. But behind the scenes, everyone knew the real reason for the deal. It wasn't just about creating a bigger bank. It was about Jamie Dimon taking over JPMorgan Chase. Wall Street held its breath. Would the board let Dimon in? Would Harrison fight to keep control? Would Dimon be pushed aside again? But unlike Weil, Harrison wasn't threatened. He saw in Dimon the future of banking. In 2004, the deal was finalized. Bank One merged with JPMorgan Chase. 1 year later, Jamie Dimon became CEO. It was official. Jamie Dimon was back. And this time, he wasn't just running a bank. He was running one of the most powerful financial institutions in the world. But his biggest test, the thing that would define his entire career, that was still to come. Because just 3 years later, the entire financial world would collapse. And Jamie Dimon would face the biggest crisis of his life. The 2008 financial crisis was unlike anything seen before. Banks that had stood for over a century collapsed overnight. Wall Street executives, once untouchable, begged for government bailouts. Entire economies teetered on the brink of ruin. And in the middle of it all, one man stood tall. While other banks drowned in toxic assets, bad loans, and reckless speculation, JPMorgan Chase stood strong. Not because it was lucky, but because Jamie Dimon saw it coming. Years before the crash, Dimon noticed something no one else wanted to admit: the market was overheating. Banks were making risky bets on mortgage-backed securities, pouring billions into investments that looked safe on paper but were built on a foundation of unstable home loans. Everyone was making money, and no one wanted to stop. Except Dimon. He hated the subprime mortgage boom. It didn't make sense to him. Banks were lending money to people who could barely afford it, then packaging those loans into securities and selling them off as safe investments. Dimon wasn't convinced. He grilled his executives, demanding answers. What happens if housing prices stop going up? How much risk are we actually taking? What if this entire system crashes? Most people brushed off his concerns. The market was booming, profits were soaring, and competitors like Citigroup and Lehman Brothers were making record-breaking amounts of money. But Dimon didn't care about short-term profits. He cared about survival. So while other banks doubled down on risk, JPMorgan pulled back. Dimon ordered his team to reduce exposure to risky mortgage-backed securities. He demanded that the bank build up cash reserves, what he called a fortress balance sheet. He refused to chase profits just because everyone else was. And then, in 2007, the first cracks in the system appeared. Housing prices stopped rising. Then, they started falling. Suddenly, millions of homeowners couldn't afford their mortgages. The securities that Wall Street had bet everything on turned to dust. One by one, banks began to crumble. Bear Stearns was the first to go. A Wall Street giant, once worth billions, was now days away from total collapse. Investors were panicking. The government needed someone to step in before Bear Stearns' failure triggered a global meltdown. And they knew there was only one man capable of handling it. On a cold March night in 2008, Dimon got a call from the Federal Reserve. Bear Stearns was collapsing. They needed JPMorgan to step in and buy it. Dimon could have said no. Let Bear Stearns fail. Let the market take its course. But he knew this wasn't just about one bank. If Bear Stearns went under, the damage could spread like wildfire. So Dimon made his move. He offered to buy Bear Stearns for $2 per share. A company that had been worth $170 per share just months earlier was now being scooped up for pennies. Investors were furious. The government was nervous. But Dimon didn't care. He had just saved Wall Street from its first major casualty. And that was only the beginning. Months later, another titan started to crumble. Lehman Brothers was drowning in bad debt. Like Bear Stearns, it had bet everything on risky mortgage-backed securities. And now, with the housing market in freefall, it had no way out. The government begged JPMorgan to step in again. If Dimon bought Lehman, he could stop another disaster. But this time, Dimon said no. The difference? Lehman Brothers was too far gone. Bear Stearns had been failing, but it still had value. Lehman? It was a ticking time bomb. Taking it over would have put JPMorgan in danger. Dimon wasn't about to risk his own empire to save a doomed one. And so, on September 15, 2008, Lehman Brothers collapsed. It was the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history. And the financial world went into freefall. Stock markets crashed. Banks failed. The global economy was on the brink of disaster. In a matter of weeks, Wall Street became a war zone. CEOs who had been celebrated just months earlier were now begging for government bailouts. Trillions of dollars vanished overnight. But JPMorgan? It stood firm. While Citigroup, Bank of America, and Goldman Sachs ran out of cash, JPMorgan's fortress balance sheet held strong. Because Dimon had been ready. While other banks had been reckless, JPMorgan had been cautious. While others had chased easy profits, Dimon had planned for survival. And now, he was the last man standing. With the financial world in ruins, Dimon saw his biggest opportunity yet. The U.S. government needed help. The economy was collapsing, and banks were failing too fast for Washington to keep up. So when the government needed a strong bank to take over Washington Mutual, the largest bank failure in U.S. history, they turned to Jamie Dimon. He bought Washington Mutual for $1.9 billion, instantly expanding J.P. Morgan's reach across America. While other banks struggled to survive, Dimon grew his empire. By the end of 2008, Jamie Dimon was the most powerful banker in America. Citigroup had been crippled. Bank of America was barely standing. Lehman Brothers was gone. And JPMorgan Chase. It was stronger than ever. Dimon hadn't just survived the financial crisis, he had used it to make JP Morgan the biggest, most dominant bank in America. The man who had been fired by Sandy Weill was now the king of Wall Street. And the best part? Weill himself had admitted he had made a mistake. In an interview, he was asked if he regretted firing Dimon. His answer: "Oh, I think there's no question. I wish he was there instead of Chuck Prince." Chuck Prince, the man who had replaced Dimon at Citigroup, had led the bank straight into disaster. Dimon had won. But power comes with a price. The world was watching. Washington was watching. And soon, Jamie Dimon wouldn't just be battling rival bankers. He'd be facing off against the United States government itself. Because the next war wasn't going to be against a financial crisis. It was going to be against regulation, public outrage, and politicians who wanted revenge on Wall Street. And Jamie Dimon? He was ready for battle. Jamie Dimon had emerged from the wreckage of the 2008 financial crisis as the most powerful banker in America. While his rivals were scrambling for survival, begging for government bailouts, or watching their institutions crumble, he had done what no one else could. He had turned a crisis into an opportunity. J.P. Morgan Chase wasn't just surviving, it was dominating. But as history has shown, power comes with a price. Dimon wasn't just a banker anymore. He was a symbol. To Wall Street, he was a genius strategist, a man who had outmaneuvered every competitor and proven that his vision of banking was superior. But to the public? To politicians? He was something else entirely. He was the face of Wall Street greed. The financial crisis had wiped out trillions of dollars in wealth, cost millions of Americans their homes and jobs, and plunged the global economy into chaos. And while Dimon had played it safer than others, while J.P. Morgan had avoided the worst of the reckless risk-taking that had doomed Citigroup, Lehman, and AIG, none of that mattered. To the world outside Wall Street, all bankers were the same. And that meant Jamie Dimon was about to face his biggest battle yet, not against markets or competitors, but against Washington itself. At first, Dimon did what he always did. He fought back. He argued that J.P. Morgan had been the responsible bank, that they had been forced to take a bailout just to stabilize the system, that they had done nothing wrong. And for a time, it worked. In 2009, as other banks struggled to regain their footing, J.P. Morgan Chase was reporting record profits. While others were still in chaos, Dimon was expanding. Buying assets, increasing market share, proving that he wasn't just the smartest banker in the room, he was the only one left standing. But Washington wasn't impressed. The anger of the American public had to go somewhere. People had lost their homes, their savings, their futures. And politicians? They needed a villain. The government launched investigation after investigation into Wall Street. The Dodd-Frank Act was passed, introducing the most sweeping banking regulations since the Great Depression. And at the center of it all was Dimon. He was called to testify before Congress. Lawmakers grilled him for hours. They accused him of profiting from the crisis, of running a bank that was too big to fail, of putting the entire financial system at risk just by existing. Dimon, as always, didn't flinch. He answered every question with calm confidence, sometimes even with thinly veiled irritation. He knew that many of the politicians questioning him didn't understand finance, that they were playing to the cameras, looking for sound bites rather than real answers. And he treated them that way. At one point, a senator demanded to know why JP Morgan had been allowed to grow so large, why it hadn't been broken up like the government had once done with monopolies. Dimon's response: "With all due respect, that's a stupid question." That was Dimon. Direct. Blunt. Unapologetic. He wasn't there to grovel. He wasn't going to pretend that JP Morgan Chase wasn't the biggest, strongest bank in America. Because he wanted it to be. But even Jamie Dimon wasn't invincible. In 2012, his legendary reputation took its first real hit. JP Morgan Chase was caught in a massive trading scandal, one that would cost the bank over $6 billion. It became known as the London Whale Scandal, named after the trader in London who had made enormous, reckless bets that went wrong. For the first time in his career, Dimon wasn't ahead of the game. He had missed something. And the world saw it. When the losses were revealed, his credibility took a hit. Lawmakers pounced. Regulators sharpened their knives. The media, which had once admired his ability to avoid the worst of the financial crisis, turned on him. Dimon did what he always did: he fought. He admitted the mistake but refused to step down. He publicly called the losses a stupid mistake, but made it clear he wasn't going anywhere. And he didn't. By 2013, he had outlasted the scandal. JP Morgan Chase paid its fines, settled its lawsuits, and kept moving forward. And Dimon? He still had his job. But he had learned something. Power in finance wasn't just about making the right trades, building the right balance sheets, or making the right acquisitions. It was about navigating politics. Washington wasn't going away. Regulators weren't going away. And for the first time, Dimon understood that being the most powerful banker in America wasn't just about winning in the markets. It was about surviving the war against public opinion. So he changed. Over the next few years, Dimon did something he had never done before: he softened his image. He started talking about economic inequality. He started advocating for financial literacy programs. He started meeting with government leaders, not as an opponent, but as an ally. He even supported some regulations, something unthinkable for a Wall Street titan. And it worked. By 2018, Dimon wasn't just a survivor of the financial crisis, he was the undisputed leader of American banking. JP Morgan Chase was the largest bank in the United States. Its stock price had hit record highs. Its profits had never been bigger. And Jamie Dimon? He was still on top. Even after the London Whale Scandal. Even after the relentless attacks from Congress. Even after the most turbulent decade in banking history. He had won. And as of today, he's still winning. Sandy Weil is long gone. Citigroup never fully recovered. Many of the CEOs who had once been his rivals have retired in disgrace. But Jamie Dimon? He's still sitting in the same chair. Still making the biggest deals. Still running the most powerful bank in America. Because while everyone else was fighting for survival, Jamie Dimon played the long game. And that's why, after all these years, he's still the king of Wall Street. Jamie Dimon had done what no one else could. He had outlasted rivals, crises, scandals, and even the full weight of the U.S. government. While the CEOs of Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, and Citigroup had been wiped off the chessboard, Dimon was still sitting at the top of the most powerful bank in America. But survival was never enough for him. He wasn't just trying to keep JPMorgan Chase alive. He wanted to make it untouchable. By 2018, JPMorgan wasn't just the biggest bank in the US, it was the biggest bank in the world by market capitalization. Dimon had spent the last decade expanding its reach, increasing its assets, and making it stronger than ever before. Every financial storm that had taken out his competition had only made him stronger. But Wall Street is never stable. It's a game of constant war. And Dimon knew that the next battle was already on the horizon. His biggest enemy? Technology. For over a century, banking had been dominated by traditional financial institutions. But now, Silicon Valley was coming. Tech startups were building alternatives to banks. Companies like PayPal, Square, and Stripe were creating faster, more convenient ways to move money. Fintech was becoming the new battlefield, and for the first time, people were starting to question if the big banks could survive the future. Dimon saw it coming. Unlike his rivals, who dismissed the tech revolution, Dimon embraced it. He invested billions into digital banking, upgrading JP Morgan's technology, hiring top software engineers, and preparing his company for a world where cash was disappearing and everything was going online. But he wasn't just fighting against fintech. He was fighting against the rise of cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin, Ethereum, and dozens of other digital currencies were threatening to disrupt the entire banking system. Crypto wasn't just another tech innovation, it was a direct attack on the traditional financial world. And Dimon hated it. He publicly attacked Bitcoin, calling it a fraud, saying it was only used by criminals, and warning that governments would shut it down. But behind the scenes, JP Morgan was quietly developing its own blockchain technology, working on its own digital currency, and preparing for a world where crypto might actually become mainstream. Because if there's one thing Jamie Dimon knows better than anyone, it's this: you don't fight the future. You control it. But even as he was preparing JP Morgan for the next evolution of finance, another challenge was brewing. A challenge that no one saw coming. In 2020, the world shut down. The COVID-19 pandemic wasn't just a public health crisis, it was an economic disaster. Businesses closed. Unemployment skyrocketed. Entire industries collapsed. And once again, Wall Street was in freefall. Dimon had been through crises before, but this was different. The government wasn't just bailing out banks this time, it was printing trillions of dollars to keep the economy from collapsing. And that kind of spending? It was going to have consequences. Dimon warned the world. He told investors that inflation was coming, that the government's massive stimulus programs were going to create a long-term problem. He told businesses to prepare, to hold on to cash, to be ready for economic turbulence in the years ahead. But Washington didn't listen. And in 2022, Dimon's warnings became reality. Inflation soared to its highest levels in 40 years. The Federal Reserve was forced to raise interest rates aggressively, and suddenly, the economy was slowing down. Stocks plummeted. Tech companies that had been booming started laying off thousands of employees. And the financial world? It was bracing for another potential recession. But Dimon was ready. JP Morgan's fortress balance sheet was stronger than ever. While other banks were worried about rising interest rates, Dimon had positioned his company to profit from it. The higher rates went, the more money JP Morgan made. And once again, as others struggled, Dimon thrived. Even after decades of dominance, Jamie Dimon wasn't slowing down. He was still making massive deals, still shaping the global economy, still the most powerful man in banking. But now, in his late 60s, people are starting to ask the question, how much longer can he keep going? Dimon has hinted at retirement before, but he never steps down. Every time he's asked, he pushes the timeline further. Some say he's waiting for the perfect successor. Others say he simply can't walk away from the power. Because Jamie Dimon doesn't just run a bank. He runs Wall Street. And when he finally does leave, it won't just be the end of an era for JP Morgan Chase. It will be the end of one of the greatest banking empires in history. Jamie Dimon doesn't know how to quit. For years, people have speculated about when he would step down, hand over the reins, and finally walk away from JP Morgan Chase. But Dimon isn't like other CEOs. He doesn't follow the script. He doesn't believe in stepping aside while there's still a game to be played. And as long as he has control, he's going to keep winning. The rumors of his retirement started years ago. Every time, he dismissed them. In 2015, he said he'd leave in 5 years. Then in 2020, he said another 5 years. By 2023, he laughed when asked about it. "I'm still here," he said. And that's all that mattered. Because as far as Wall Street is concerned, Jamie Dimon is irreplaceable. JP Morgan Chase has been through wars. The 2008 financial crisis. The London whale scandal. The rise of fintech. The crypto boom and bust. The COVID-19 pandemic. The inflation shock of 2022. Each time, Dimon has been at the helm, steering the ship through the storm while his rivals sank. He isn't just the CEO of a bank. He is the last titan of Wall Street. The generation of bankers he once competed with. Gone. Sandy Weil, the man who fired him, left Citigroup in disgrace. Richard Fuld of Lehman Brothers. His bank collapsed. Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs. Retired. The CEOs of Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, and countless other firms have come and gone, but Dimon is still standing. And not just standing, winning. Under Dimon, JP Morgan Chase has grown into the most powerful bank in the world. Its assets have soared past $3.9 trillion. Its profits are bigger than some countries' economies. When financial crises hit, Washington doesn't turn to the Federal Reserve first. They call Jamie Dimon. That kind of power is intoxicating. And Dimon knows it. There's a reason why, even as he hints at retirement, he never actually leaves. Because stepping down from JP Morgan Chase isn't just about leaving a job. It's about leaving the throne. And Jamie Dimon isn't ready to give up his crown. Even as he approaches his late 60s, his energy hasn't faded. He still dominates earnings calls, speaks at global economic summits, and personally meets with world leaders. His opinion still moves markets. His words still shape policy. But the reality is, time catches up to everyone. Even Dimon. One day, he will leave. And when that day comes, it will be the end of an era. Because no matter who takes his place, no matter how strong JP Morgan remains, there will never be another Jamie Dimon. He didn't just build a bank. He built a legacy that may never be matched again. But legacies are complicated things. Dimon is admired, respected, even feared. But he's also controversial. There are those who say he's too powerful. That JP Morgan has grown so large under his leadership that it poses a risk to the global financial system. That no single institution should have the kind of influence his bank does. Dimon has dismissed those concerns. He argues that JP Morgan is strong because of its size, not in spite of it. That if a crisis ever happens again, the world will need a bank like JP Morgan Chase to stabilize the system. That breaking it up, as some politicians have suggested, would only make things worse. But the critics keep coming. Regulators continue to target Wall Street.